Staggered Kluson style tuners are my favorite. They look classic, are easy to string and de-string, keep your fingertips safe, and with a different height for every pair of strings, they create a perfect break angle for every string, which eliminates the need for a string tree. The first step for installation is to make sure the holes in the headstock are an appropriate match for the bushings. In this case, the bushings are very obviously far too loose, and with digital calipers, it's easy to see why. The tuner holes in the headstock measure 10 mm in diameter, while the bushings measure 8.8 mm in diameter. The solution to this is aftermarket adapter bushings, which are sized for larger hole diameters. Here I have a set of Kluson MB65LN adapter bushings, which are made to fit 10 mm tuner holes. These ones measure 9.92 mm wide. They press in firmly by hand, but just a little too easily. I can also press them out by hand with minimal effort using a transfer punch. The transfer punch is my favorite tool for pressing bushings out, and with properly fitting bushings, they'll require the use of a hammer to knock them out. To get these bushings snug enough to meet that criteria, I'll have to do some extra work. For a tighter fit, I'll wet the tuner holes with a generous amount of Titebond and let it sit for 10 or 20 minutes to swell the wood. Adding Titebond and pressing the bushings in by hand immediately can also work, but I prefer verifying that the fit is right before I press the bushings in. A proper fit will be too hard to press in by hand, but easy to press in mechanically. I use a tool my longtime friend and mentor Steve Kubecka came up with. A 2.5-inch C-clamp with a flat steel bar TIG welded to one end. The steel is covered in leather for protection. This is an excellent tool for installing bolt-on necks as well, and you can see my process using this special clamp in my bolt-on neck installation video linked in the description box. It even has utility in broken headstock repairs and more. But for tuner bushing installation, the padded side goes underneath the headstock for support, while the top presses the bushing in. The Titebond made a very obvious difference here, with the bushing pressing in much more firmly. I'll repeat the same process for the other bushings until all of them are installed, and then it's time to load in the tuners. That would go really smoothly if these were the correct size. Whoops. Apparently the Kluson adapter bushings don't have the correct internal diameter to fit the Godot vintage staggered tuner shafts. I'm going to have to get the transfer punch and the hammer and knock all of these out, then use Godot brand adapter bushings instead. The Godot bushings measure 10.17 mm, which is a bit wider than the tuner holes. To get them to fit, I'll have to use a peg hole reamer. I use the semi-fluted reamer from StuMac. The goal here is to enlarge the hole just enough to press the bushing halfway in by hand, but requiring a clamp to press it in the rest of the way. That will ensure that the hole is tight enough for a secure fit, but not so tight that the bushing cracks the peg head. With the correct bushings installed and looking good, we can move on to installing the actual tuners. The key here is getting them straight. Mylar film protects the headstock while I put a beveled Starrett straight edge against the tuners. Using the same special clamp as before, the padded side goes on the face of the peg head while the regular side clamps the straight edge in place. This allows the use of a 6-inch machinist ruler to straighten the tuners on the other side, as well as adjusting the tuners side to side so they're spaced evenly apart. Using this hooked probe I got at the electronics store, I make a set mark by eye as close to the center of the hole as possible. You can use the machinist ruler while doing this to make sure the tuners don't move at all, but if you're careful, you can do just fine without it. Then drill pilot holes into the set marks. For the drill bit size, we can refer to Bolt Depot's chart and see that for a number 2 wood screw, a 1/16 of an inch drill bit is the appropriate size for the pilot hole. Put the drill bit in a vise and hold up the screw to the end of the bit, then tape around the bit just shy of where the screw ends. This will make sure you don't drill too far. As a side note, you can find these screws in bulk on Bolt Depot as number 2 by 3/8 brass wood screws, or number 2 by 3/8 stainless steel sheet metal screws, depending on your color preference. This is by far the most common tuner screw size, and since they're so easy to drop, you might appreciate having some backups. All that being said, here I'm being lazy and using a 5/64 bit, which is about 78 thousandths in diameter, only 8 thousandths less than the diameter of the screw, and I didn't tape the bit off and didn't use a drill press. I drilled to about half the depth of the screw, then threaded the screw into untapped wood for the rest of the way. You can get away with this lazier method, and I've done so plenty of times. But to be truly professional about it, use the smaller 1/16 inch bit, tape it off, and use a drill press. However, whatever method you use, be warned. Use plenty of wax, and partially thread the screw in and out as many times as necessary until it gets a snug but smooth travel all the way down. If at any point you're threading the screw in and it feels unusually hard to turn, stop immediately. Apply some more wax and thread it in again. You don't want the head of the screw snapping off, and you don't want to split the wood. The aptly named screw wax is my personal favorite, but candle wax will also work. Waxing the screws is much more important than the type of wax you choose, and keep this tip in mind for neck screws as well. With the tuner successfully installed, this neck is looking better than ever. Be sure to check the description box for a link to my modifications and installations playlist for not only an archive of this video, but many others showing installations of necks, bridge bushings, and much, much more. In the meantime, enjoy your newly installed tuners and stay tuned for more guitar everything, right here on Guitar MD.